Picture a battlefield in Europe, centuries before the word antibiotic exists. A soldier goes down with a deep wound to the leg. In that era, the wound is the real danger, not the blade that made it. The infection that sets in over the next few days kills far more men than the fighting ever does. But this soldier's medic does something that sounds like folklore. He reaches up into the trees, pulls down a handful of pale, hair-like strands, and packs them straight into the open wound. And against everything we would expect, the wound stays clean. The soldier lives. That same strand is still hanging over forest trails across America today, drifting off the branches in pale, silver-green threads, looking exactly like the beard of some old man who wandered into the woods and left it behind. Hikers walk right beneath it every day and never look up. The ones who do look up assume it is moss, or some kind of sickly growth choking a dying tree. It is neither. For at least 2,000 years, that same instinct surfaced on 3 separate continents, wherever people bled, burned with fever, or carried a wound that had started to turn. Chinese physicians were writing this strand into their medicine over 100 years before the birth of Christ. Then, in a single American decade, it went from trusted wound medicine to something the FDA had to publicly warn people about. Not because the strand hanging in the forest had changed, because someone found a way to make money from it. So what is it? And why were you quietly taught to stay away from the one free antibiotic growing directly over your own head? Welcome to Nature's Lost Vault. The strand has a name, Usnea. The few who know it at all call it old man's beard. And the first thing you need to understand is the one thing almost everybody gets wrong. It is not a plant. Pull a fresh strand apart slowly, and you will see it. The green outer sheath separates, and a single white, stretchy thread springs across the gap like a tiny rubber band. That thread is fungus. The green is algae. Usnea is 2 different living things, a fungus and an alga, fused into one body so completely that for centuries nobody realized they were looking at a partnership instead of a plant. The fungus builds the structure and pulls in water. The alga catches sunlight and makes food. Neither one could survive alone in the places Usnea thrives. Think about that for a second. The medicine over your head is not one organism. It is a truce. And here is the part that matters if you ever plan to find it yourself. Usnea drinks straight from the air, so it cannot live where the air is dirty. Foresters use it as a living test for pollution. If old man's beard is hanging thick in a stand of trees, the air in that forest is clean. If it has vanished, something is wrong. So the strand tells you 2 things at once. It is medicine, and it is a receipt for clean air. So where did all those wound stories come from? The archive opens in ancient China, over 100 years before the birth of Christ, where physicians recorded a lichen like this one for surface infections, skin ulcers, and wounds that refused to heal. From there it turns up almost everywhere people lived near cool, wet forests. In Finland, herbalists used it for wounds and athlete's foot. In Scandinavia, for blisters. Across the Pacific Northwest, the Naitinat and the Maka peoples dressed open wounds with a native Usnea long before any Europeans set foot on the continent. And in the Soviet Union, chemists took the active ingredient, turned it into a salt they called binan, and used it to shut down infection in 2nd and 3rd degree burns. Every one of these cultures, separated by oceans and centuries, landed on the same US. You put it on the outside of the body, right on the injury. You would think someone would have gathered all of this in one place and asked why it worked. Eventually, someone did. The active ingredient was isolated in 1844 and given a name: Usnic acid. After the Second World War, interest exploded. In one 10-year stretch, between 1950 and 1959, researchers published 64 separate scientific papers on this single compound. Here is what they found, and it lines up almost perfectly with what those old healers already knew. Usnic acid is unusually good at stopping one particular family of bacteria, the gram-positive kind. That family includes staph and strep, the same bugs that turn a simple cut into a life-threatening infection. In the laboratory, Usnic acid has been shown to halt the growth of staph, strep, and even the bacterium behind tuberculosis. The way it works is almost mechanical. It tears open the outer membrane of the bacterial cell and jams the machinery the bacteria use to copy themselves. On a wound, that is precisely what you want. And this is where the story stops being only history. In an Italian hospital in the city of L'Aquila, researchers gathered 20 strains of MRSA, the drug-resistant staph that modern hospitals fear most, scraped from real patients, from surgical wounds and infected catheters. A tiny dose of Usnic acid stopped 90% of them. Then they tried something bolder. They took a quinolone antibiotic those resistant bacteria had already learned to shrug off, and they added Usnic acid to it. The combination worked. The forest strand made a failing modern drug effective again. Sit with that. As the antibiotics we depend on keep losing ground, one of the compounds researchers circle back to is the one that was hanging over a soldier's head 500 years ago. And wounds were never the whole story. Look at Usnea draped through the canopy, and you can see why one of its oldest nicknames is the lungs of the forest. Old healers followed a simple logic. A medicine that looked like breathing tissue was the one you reached for when the breathing went wrong. Across China, Europe, and North America, Usnea was steeped for sore throats, stubborn coughs, and chest infections, gargled and sipped, never swallowed by the handful. The same drying, cleaning action that closed a wound was put to work on the throat and the lungs. So this should be sitting in every medicine cabinet in America. It is free, it grows on trees, and the science keeps backing up the tradition. It is not there. And the reason is the part of the story almost nobody tells. That same membrane-breaking power turned out to be the problem. In the early 2000s, supplement companies noticed something in the research. Usnic acid does not only disrupt bacteria. In high enough doses, it revs up human metabolism by interfering with the tiny power plants inside our own cells. To a company selling weight loss, that sounded like a gold mine. Speed up metabolism, burn more fat, sell the pills. So they concentrated pure Usnic acid, the compound an old healer would have laid gently on the skin, sealed 100 milligrams of it into a capsule, and told people to swallow it every single day. One of those products was called lipokinetics, made by a company named Syntrax Innovations, and marketed straight to the weight loss and bodybuilding crowd. And people's livers started failing. The FDA received 21 reports of severe liver damage tied to supplements containing Usnic acid. The injuries struck otherwise healthy adults, some in their 20s, within a few weeks of starting the pills. One case ended in an emergency liver transplant. In 2001, the FDA issued a public warning, and lipokinetics was pulled from the market. The pills were not the only place trouble surfaced. Rare cases of liver injury have even turned up in people drinking lichen-based kombucha teas, though no one ever proved whether the Usnic acid or something else in the brew was to blame. Here is the quiet irony in all of it. The very trait that made Usnic acid a wound cleaner for 2,000 years, its knack for tearing cell walls apart, is what made it dangerous the moment you concentrated it and swallowed it by the capsule. The healers had it right the whole time. It belongs on the outside of the body, in the small amounts nature tucks into a strand of lichen. not stuffed into a fat burner pill and sent down your throat. But that is not the lesson America took away. The word that permanently stuck to Usnea was not ancient wound medicine. It was liver damage. Add one more thing on top. By the time the pill scandal hit, penicillin had already been mass-produced for decades. Why teach anyone to identify a lichen when a pharmacy sold the pills? So a medicine that survived 2,000 years of war, plague, and frontier hardship was quietly filed away in a single generation. First made to look obsolete, then made to look dangerous, both times by an industry that had something to sell you instead. The Strand kept growing anyway. It is still up there. If you want to know it for yourself, here is the honest version. Find a forest with clean air, because that is the only place it lives. Look for the pale, hair-like strands on the branches and pull one gently to check for that white elastic cord running down the center. That cord is the one true test that separates Usnea from its lookalikes. A few beard lichens out there are bright yellow, and those you leave alone. Take it only from branches already on the ground, the ones the wind knocked down. Never from a living tree, because Usnea grows slower than almost anything in the forest, less than half an inch a year. Take a little, and leave the rest. And use it the way 3 continents used it. On the outside. A strand steeped into an oil, a clean wash for a scrape. A poultice laid over a cut you want to keep from turning. Not a miracle. A tool. The same tool a Russian nurse, a Chinese physician, and a Pacific Northwest healer all reached for, hanging in plain sight, over the heads of people who were taught to look at the pharmacy instead. It is still there, draped over the trail, filtering the air, waiting, the way it has waited for 2,000 years for someone to finally look up. If this vault changed the way you look at the wild things in your own world, subscribe to Nature's Lost Vault and stay with us. There is a whole forest left to open.